that's really the only question I would have. Or why not New York or Washington? I mean, these are just cities that are seen a lot more as, you know, intellectual and political centers. I mean, like, I don't take LA seriously as like an intellectual center, so.
Fair,
You know.
fair enough, but the rest of the world already sees California as a whole as a pioneering center on issues. So for climate change,
Yeah.
Governor Schwarzenegger did climate change. We are the only government in the entire Western Hemisphere that has this. America still hasn't gotten to it. It's us alone. It's been years later, and we're going to wait and see if anybody else does it. That was such a big thing that Prime Minister Tony Blair flew to California, didn't stop anywhere else in America, had a joint press conference with Schwarzenegger, and they flew all the way back to England. And then he was followed by Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov, who did the exact same thing. Europeans flew to California, said, we see you individually doing climate change, good job, ignored the rest of America, and then flew right back to their home country. What's that tell you? Anybody who know who Yao Ming is? Tall, Chinese player? Yao Ming started a new business. He's selling California wines to China, and his business is booming. Because he said, you know what? Chinese people will buy anything from California because China already has such a positive image of California. So he saw the wines and literally sold them, and all he did is ship them over there, and they're exploding. We already have the international reputation from all of the superpowers, and yes, there is a bit of vapid cultural expression in the Southern California area, but
Yeah.
California as a whole is seen as a global leader on pretty much every issue that is of significance and new. Right or wrong, good or bad, we have that image. The reason why not New York? So, who's been to San Francisco? Okay. San Francisco City is not that big, right? I mean, you can drive from one end to the other. So, here's New York, as everyone pictures it. It's a giant state, stuff. No, no. So, this is New York State. Here's Manhattan, and here's downtown Manhattan. And this is where you have TV shows like Sex and the City and all your movies showing how people are diverse and stuff. The entire rest of New York State and the entire rest of New York City outside of the downtown Manhattan area is not diverse. It's about as diverse as New Hampshire and Connecticut. Now when you go to California, here's us. I'm living proof. I'm from the Central Valley. People in the Southern California area and the Bay Area assume there's no diversity in the Central Valley. There's diversity in every single town. You can go to Tulare, and there's an ethnic Chinese community that's been there 70 years, and a couple Japanese families that have been there for a century, in addition to Mexicans, Native Americans, and Anglo people. We have that throughout the state. That's why no other place in America. And when we're looking at the special diversity, and you're looking at, do you have Russians, Italians, Americans, Indians, Chinese, etc.? It's only us. Additionally, I visited New York a lot. America talks a big game about diversity. We live it. It's all talk. I went to downtown Chinatown here. I walked down to the main area. It was all Chinese people. I was the only non-Chinese person there. And they looked at me like, what the hell are you doing here? I've gone to Monterey Park in Alhambra in Los Angeles, which is an Asian city, and there's not Asians walking around. And when I go to a restaurant, people don't look at me like, what are you doing here? You go and actually see the minorities in this little tip, you realize that how New York does diversity is not how we do it. It looks really nice. We walk the walk that we talk. They don't. They show it in movies and it looks pretty. We actually live it. Yes, please.
I have two questions.
Yes.
You said there hasn't been a real leader in the UN, in a lot from the different, it's either an American or a European in the past 7 years.
Yeah.
And there's been, the Secretary General has been Kofi Annan and Ban Ki-moon, so how would you explain that?
The undersecretary, who's not the figurehead position, has always been a European and American. Like right now they have a South Korean in charge, but the people who are running the organization and the leadership council that has decided who actually gets to be the person that's on top is run by primarily Americans and Europeans.
And then the second question for you. If having this, having what Switzerland has generates a lot of money,
Yes.
why will Switzerland want to give it up for a future of unemployment and?
Yeah. I think they don't have the option, that's the whole point.
Okay.
Great question, and that's the answer.
Yeah.
They can't. Not unless they're gonna port Russians, Americans, Chinese, Indians, and Brazilians into Switzerland. By the way, has anybody seen their new political ads? They have this black flag party. It's the Swiss party saying no new immigrants, and we don't like white people, non-white people here. So, I don't think they have what it takes. Let's talk about that. A lot of the world talks about diversity. They have not proven it. Why isn't Australia a candidate for this? Here's why. Because Australia's only recently had immigrants, and they have race riots. Type in France and immigration, race riots. Type in England and immigration, race riots. Now, we too have had riots here, but we have a century of getting along. They've recently started immigrating people, and 5 years ago, remember southern Paris was all in flames? That's how good they're doing immigration. So, talk is nice. This is what, you gotta prove it. You have to have been diverse and dealing with the issues for over a century. Anything less than that, you don't really deserve to even be at the consideration table. Do you have any questions?
What's your
Ask hard questions.
background? This is such an
Thank you.
interesting project. I was wondering how you got into it.
Thank you. 7 years ago, I saw on the news America was going into Iraq for the second time. And on CNN and MSNBC, and I'm not arguing pro or con, good or bad, this is just what started me on this journey. They had a news report, a newscaster came on one of the major networks and said, well, it looks like America is going into Iraq. 70% of Americans support the decision to go into Iraq. 5 minutes later, it was either that station or another major network. New survey in from California. 70% of Californians are against going into Iraq. War is the biggest decision that any society can ever make. It's the most critical decision where you really have a reflection on the culture of the people. And when it came down to it, California had 180 degrees the exact opposite opinion of America. And I thought, well, why is that? Exact opposite opinion of the majority of Americans on one of the most important issues that this society has ever faced. And that made me realize something's different. Now, I always grew up hearing that we're different stuff, but, what does that mean? And then from that point, I started researching the book, going, why is California so unique and why is it different? And then that turned into trying to find facts for that, and which is an appendix in the book. It's the first appendix. But while finding that, I began to find statistics. And this is the other part of the book. So, anybody know what 80 to $120 billion equals? One state of California budget. That's how much it takes to run the entire state of California. So, here's where it gets good. Federal income taxes. You pay for military, Social Security, roads, and all the good stuff you're supposed to pay for. After Californians have paid for everything that they're supposed to pay for, they're taxed an additional $80 to $120 billion. This is called red state welfare. There's a variety of other terms. So after you pay for everything that you're supposed to do as a Californian, you pay additional federal income taxes that equals equivalent to one state of California budget. You've done this for 30 years. You've wasted one state budget for 3 decades. That's documented and proven. So when we talk about we don't have money for schools, we don't have money to fix roads, that's a lie. We have money. This is taken from us. Now where does this extra money go? It goes all the way to DC, and then they break it out to grants for 35 other states. These grants that go to these other states with the extra money that's beyond what you needed to pay for go to pay for roads, schools, dams, bridges, airports, seaports, levees, etc. And here's the kicker. While you're paying for these people to have the best of all this infrastructure, the federal government has already rated your state as having the worst of all of this infrastructure in all 50 states. So you're worst in all of America, have been that way for 30 years, but you still paid $120 billion every single year to make sure that 35 other states continue to already do better than you. They're already doing better than you. And then you're paying to make sure they do that, and this has gone on for 3 decades. When I found that out, trying to find out why California is unique, I realized there was a different study. And the study and the story now is how California is used, and how if by getting out of this situation where we are what I call milked to death, we can actually go to a future where we're super wealthy. We will make money being the center of the world. But in order to get there, we'll have to become a little bit different. We can cut costs first. You realize that your state income taxes, you waste. You waste in extra federal income taxes. So whatever amount you pay for state income, look at that next time you pay it and go, I absolutely get nothing for this, and I never have. And this has gone on for 3 decades, and guess what's going to happen in the next 3 decades? The exact same thing, because we don't discuss this. Governor Schwarzenegger, when he was governor, went on TV and talked about this. Wasn't really picked up. Jacqueline Spear, state senator, said the same thing. Wasn't really picked up. But it gets worse. So this is money that's just taken right off the top. Now, California is an international trade center. About 25% of our economy is directly related to international trade. Now, if you want to go indirectly, it gets up to like 45, etc. We are desperately connected to the international economy in order to have jobs and a successful economy. Now let's look at the average American state. 5%. That's how much the average U.S. states link to the international economy and how much diversity and how much immigrants they have. Whereas we're almost half. There's a book by Professor Abraham Lowenthal. He's from California State Long Beach University, and the book is called California Rising, where he documents the billions of dollars California loses because we cannot get trade deals passed by Washington, D.C. We're in the middle of a recession. Who's heard about this? Governor Schwarzenegger got a bunch of California business people. They went to different Asian nations. He had California CEOs meet with Asian nation CEOs. They worked out the contracts, signed the deals. He came back to America, took the trade paperwork that was all figured out, put it right on the desk of George W. Bush, a fellow Republican, and George Bush sat on it for 5 years. Gets better. Barack Obama becomes president. Governor Schwarzenegger does the exact same thing. Mr. President, last president wasn't interested in pursuing these trade deals. Would you please approve these? Sits on it for 5 years. Republican president, nothing. Democrat president, nothing. You can YouTube Schwarzenegger, where he's criticizing both of these presidents. We're in the middle of a recession. We have a way to get 50,000 new jobs and multiple millions of dollars inputted into our economy through things that we could do for ourselves, and we are literally blocked for 10 years. So when we need it most, you're not allowed to make more money for yourself because your issues just aren't important to me. Let's get to something important like gay rights or if abortion is going to be legal. Let's not talk about trade deals and billions of dollars. This has gone on for decades. Schwarzenegger publicly criticized this. Have any of you ever heard this in the news media? Right, because we don't talk about it. It's there. It's just like the world falling apart. There are these truths out there that we've never assembled. There was a tax foundation study came out in 2005 that was reported a bunch of times that California's losing $120 billion. That never got picked up by the mainstream newspapers. I cited it because I looked into it. It's out there. It took me 5 minutes to find on Google. It's not hard. In fact, most of this book was researched with the internet. I found most of what I was looking at within minutes of typing it in. You don't have anybody looking for this. So you don't have anybody looking for a solution. So guess what's going to happen for another 30 years? You're going to lose 120 billion, you're going to be blocked from helping yourself out, and the rest of the world's going to fall apart. As far as my particular background, I don't have a foreign policy background. I worked in government. I worked in government for 10 years. I was a liaison for federal funding coming into the state system, particularly for transportation. And so I got to see closely what we call the big joke. Everybody in state work knows that we Californians put way more into the system than we ever get from the federal government. And I go, why is this a joke? Why don't we ever talk about this? Oh, you're not going to fix it. That was the attitude. I wasn't happy with that. I was working in the Bay Area, and a section of the 880 bridge just fell on a trucker, crushed his truck. He barely lived. If it had, I mean, it was literally 2 feet behind him. If it fell on him, he'd be squashed flat. That section of the bridge was due for maintenance. We just never got to it because we didn't have the money. And then I read in the newspaper that same month, Missouri got $200 million for a new road that wasn't broken apart and wasn't a bridge. I'm going, things fall on us, collapse. We have the worst school in America, and yet everybody else gets money to support themselves. The levee over Sacramento has been rated by the federal government as bad as the one over New Orleans before Katrina. 1 million people would have to move from Sacramento if that levee broke. There would probably be 1,000 deaths, and we're talking about a couple $2 billion in property damage. The federal government has known about it for 10 years. It has not been fixed. It's as bad as New Orleans before Katrina. Nothing's been done about it, and yet they pumped $200 million into New Orleans. Aren't our lives worth fixing? Don't we deserve some money? Especially when we're pumping in $120 billion for 30 years. We're looking at $300 to $400 billion. I'm sorry, that's incorrect. It's more than that. What's 30 times 120 billion?
Like 3.6 trillion.
There you go.
Yeah.
Here's ours. 3.6 trillion. We needed a bailout. A few years ago, Governor Schwarzenegger went to the president, asked for $10 billion one time. He said no, and then you got ridiculed in Forbes magazine, MSNBC, Money magazine, Fox News. Spend crazy Californians, they spent themselves into this problem. That's why they have a deficit. That's why their economy doesn't work. It's all their fault. They're bad liberals. $10 billion out of 3.6 trillion. What percentage is that? It's almost nothing. We go and ask for a handout once, and we get ridiculed instead. I was at the university bookstore, and I saw a book by Glenn Beck. Everybody know Glenn Beck? Okay, so Glenn Beck in 2005, we had forest fires here in California. In Southern California, about 1,000 homes were burned down, a couple firefighters were burned alive, a couple thousand people were displaced. Glenn Beck goes on Fox News and says, a bunch of people who hate America lost their homes today. Ha ha ha. Fox News aired that throughout the year, multiple times. There was no protest and it was all fine. Now add up dead Californians, burned homes, and it's a joke, to it's okay to take $120 billion every single year for 30 years. A connection? Maybe. How many of you have heard California the land of fruits and nuts? Yeah. Well, if I ridicule you day in and day out for 30 years, but I'm just joking, would you believe me? Or would you think that maybe I actually think that about you? And I'm just going, oh, I'm just joking. Jerry Falwell? Anybody ever heard of Jerry Falwell? Okay, yeah. Jerry Falwell is a national religious leader. I think he passed away recently. He helped George W. Bush get elected. He was one of the people that got that 40% of the religious right for Bush to become elected. His reward for helping George W. Bush become elected was to have a White House webpage. On the official White House webpage that you pay for with your tax dollars, Jerry Falwell got to have a page for himself where he took questions and answers from callers. Again, your money, official White House website, and this is after 9/11. Jerry takes questions from callers. One of the callers says, hey Jerry, if a terrorist snuck a nuclear bomb into California and blew it up, would that be wrong because they're evil? Jerry Falwell says, no, that's fine. That's on the official White House website after 9/11. your president, his aide, your tax dollars. Add that to Glenn Beck. How many of you heard about the National CEO Survey that came out this year? They did a survey of 500 of the top CEOs across America. In that survey, it said California's the worst for business. Okay, whatever. One of the CEOs said, I'm so sick and tired of California, they should just secede. They printed that in the national report that was publicized in national media. Anybody know who Laura Schlesinger is?
Yeah.
She's outright said, I'm sick and tired of California, get out. So, jokes about dead people, jokes about we need to get out of here, constantly losing money, constantly being blocked from actually helping ourselves. You start to see a pattern. And if you haven't seen it on that, it's all in the book. You ridicule somebody and you take their money for 30 years. You're using them and you don't respect them. Only somebody who's in an abusive relationship would stay in something like that. So when you take away state and government and replace them with people, what's happening becomes very clear. It's been this way for a while. Nixon had an insult for Californians. Dick Cheney had an insult for Californians. And what's his name? Theodore Roosevelt called California west of the West. He meant you're crazy. This goes way back. So, always been weirdos, always been the land of fruits and nuts. And that's fine, I was okay with that. But then when I learned that we are being robbed and we are being blocked from getting ourselves out of recession, I thought, well, that's not fine anymore. Something needs to be done. And then when I realized that here's this problem where the world's falling apart and nobody's talking about it, and we are literally the only place that could pull this together, that's when I finished the book. Any other questions?
Well, yeah, I mean, like, what do you propose for California getting out of this? And I mean, also as kind of like a side question to that, you know, how would California